I'll show you how to test the speed of your hard drives and give you 4 reasons why you might want to do so. Now, this is a music channel, so I'm going to be looking at this from a musician's point of view. But if you've stumbled across this video and you're not a musician, you might still find it interesting and useful, because many of the features musicians require from their hard drives will apply to non-musicians as well. The other thing I have to say is that this is just for PC users. Mac users will have the same concerns and issues but need different software. I'm not a Mac user, so I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that. Now, we'll do this using a free piece of software, and I'll run through the results so you know what to look for and what to expect from your hard drives. Now, I'll start with the 4 reasons, because if none of these apply to you, you won't want to run the disk test anyway, so you can stop watching. So the first reason is just curiosity. Perhaps you just want to know how fast your hard drives are, and that's a perfectly valid reason. The second reason is sort of associated with that, but it concerns testing the speeds of different types of drive, and you probably know there are many different types of hard drive out there. We have solid state drives, we have mechanical drives, we have drives that connect via USB, and we've got the new NVMe drives. So this will allow you to test the relative speeds of all these drives if you have more than one such drive on your system. I've still got a sore finger. The third reason would be if you've just got a new drive and you want to just check to see that the speed the manufacturer claims it runs at, it does actually run at that speed. But that's a good test, and it's good to know that you are actually getting what you have paid for. And the fourth reason is if your system is feeling a little bit sluggish. If you are a musician and are using sample libraries, if you think your system is taking just a little bit too long to read the samples from the sample libraries, then you might want to check the speed of your hard drives. So, if any of those apply to you, let's have a look at how you can test the speed of your drives. Now, if you Google how to test the speed of your hard drives, virtually every site and every video is going to recommend the same piece of software. This is no different, and the software is Crystal Disk Mark. I shall leave a link to this site in the description, so let's have a look at that, and I'll explain what you need to look for and how to download it. Now, this is not really a word of warning or a caution, it's a heads up. This is what I would call a little bit of a spammy site. It can be a little bit misleading, which I don't think is right. Now, I call it a bit of a spammy site because you think, oh, discs, yes, let's get the software, and the first thing you see is big. It's an advert, actually. It's not the download link. This advert will change. If you refresh the page, you might get a different advert. But if you click on the link or the button here, you get into a totally different place, and it's trying to get you to download another piece of software. So I think this is a bit spammy, but just be aware and don't click on this. So what you do need to click on is one of these little blue buttons. So if we scroll down, you can see there are lots of different images and different download options, and what you want is Disk Mark, Crystal Disk Mark Standard, or one of the Aeoli editions or something. What you do not want is Crystal Disk Retro, which I think is the first download option here. This will give you information about your system, which you might find useful, but it will not give you information about your hard drives. And there's a Crystal Disk Info download. I think there's a few of these. So what you need to do is to scroll down until you get to, I've passed it. Let's try this one. This is right at the bottom of the page, or pretty close to the bottom. You can see there's popping adverts up here, which you might think are the software, but they are not. So let's click on this one and see what happens. So you get taken to this page and you think, what's going on? Where's my download? But if you wait a second, there we go, the download pops up. So this is Crystal Disk Mark 8.06, 8.6. This is, at the time of making this video, the latest version. So this is what you want to download. So we've downloaded the zip file. I have extracted it, and you get all these files. And the one you want, or most likely want, is the DiskMark 64-bit. If you have a 32-bit operating system, I would just ask you why, but if you have a 32-bit operating system, use the 32-bit version, but most people, I hope, will be on 64-bit systems. So this is the file you want to run. So there is a DiskMark with an A in the name, and this is for ARM processors. And if you run it, you get a little message saying that this will not run on your system. There are not many ARM processors around, I don't think. But if you have one, then that is the one to use. So let's run the 64-bit version. So this is it, and I'm only going to run through the basic functions, and but I will point you to more information if you want to get into the weeds. So the top line gives you some options. The first is the number of tests. It runs what the Crystal DiskMark software does. It writes data to your disk, so it can tell how quickly the disk writes, and it reads the data from the disk, so it can tell how quickly it reads. So this is the number of tests it runs. So the default setting is 5. It runs 5 tests and averages the results. This next value is the size of the data, so it defaults to 1 gigabyte. Now I've just left this at 1 gigabyte. There are many sources, if you look into this, who suggest you use a higher value because some disks have a built-in cache. So if you have a small file size, the cache will absorb that and the disk will appear to run faster than it actually does over a longer period. I will let you experiment with the different sizes, though. For my test, I've just kept this at 1 gigabyte. Then you can select the drive, which we'll come to in a second, the exciting part. And finally, the results can be displayed in megabytes per second or gigabytes per second. This is the transfer read. There's some other options. Not going to go into those at the moment. So most drive manufacturers will tell you the speed of their drives in megabytes per second because it's bigger. It's a bigger number than gigabytes. It's got more digits in, or whatever. The speed is exactly the same. So right now, so I'm going to leave these as they are, and from the drop-down menu, you can see these are the drives I have on this computer. This is not my music computer, by the way. This is the one I use for video editing, for watching YouTube videos, for email, and so on. So let's just test the C drive. So I select the drive and then click on this All button, and this runs all these tests. I'll explain these in a second. So it's off doing its test. And I shall fast forward this because it will take a minute or two to do it. A couple of things to be aware of. The speed of the test will depend on several factors, not only the speed of the hard drive, but if you are doing anything else with your computer, the just general speed of your computer as well, I imagine. Okay, so let's have a look at the results. So there are 2 columns. One is the read speed and one is the write speed. And in most cases, the read speed is going to be a little bit faster. Let's have a quick look at these columns to see what they are measuring. Little balloons pop up, which is a little bit helpful. So the sequential read and write speed, this refers to reading blocks of data from the hard drive in sequence. So let me do, if I was clever, I would have a diagram of this, but I'm not that clever, so instead I'm going to use my fingers. Let's assume this is a small disk, and these are the blocks on the disk, and the disk writes data to the blocks, and when it is reading and writing sequentially, it will, let's say, read from this block and then this block and this block and this block in sequence. So this is going to be the fastest speed that I think you're going to get out of your disk drive, and this is normally the headline speed which is advertised by the drive manufacturers. Now if you move further down the list, we get onto these random reads and writes, and what this is measuring is, instead of reading and writing sequentially across the sectors, it is jumping from this block to this block to this block to this block. So it's taken a bit longer to do that, as you can see in the results. And these are probably a more accurate measurement of real world performance, because let's say you have, if you're a musician, let's say you have a violin staccato sample here and a legato sample here on these two different blocks. Is just an example. So it's going to take a little bit longer to read this, and then if you want to switch to a legato sample, it has to find it in this other block. So this is essentially what the random functions are measuring. So these are more likely to be representative of real world performance. I know you're wondering what the Q's and the T's are. These stand for queues and threads, and this is getting a little bit weedy. I'll explain how to find out more about this if you want to, but personally I'm not too bothered. I am a bit of a geek, but I'm not going to go into this in any more detail than that. This is the 50-cent tour. I wouldn't pay 25 cents for it personally, but this is the basic amount of information I think you need, and it'll give you a good example if you want to compare the speed of two or more hard drives. So you can see below we have a massive headline figure here using the sequential result. In real terms it's not quite so fast, but for musicians this will be quite fast enough. Now I shall tell you what the drives are in a second, and I'll also give you some other results from other readings from these other drives. Now before we get into looking at the results on my systems, it's worth saying a word or two about the interfaces used to connect the drives to your motherboard or your PC system. So there are of course several variations upon those. I am not going to get into them. This is really nerdy and weedy stuff. You can Google them if you want more information. But in brief, a common attachment, a common interface for connecting drives to your PC will be a SATA interface. SATA, S-A-T-A, stands for Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. Don't you love a good acronym? If only we could find one. So that is quite possibly the most common interface you will find inside your PC or inside a laptop. I think the latest, fastest drive interfaces at the moment anyway are the NVMe drives, which stands for Non-Volatile Memory Express. Another great acronym. And these drives, they look like, someone said they look like sticks of chewing gum. They look more like RAM chips than perhaps the 2.5-inch drives which we are more used to. These connect directly to the motherboard and make use of the PCI interface. So these are currently probably the fastest solid state transfer speeds you will get with an NVMe drive. You do need to have the NVMe drive connector on your motherboard, and surprisingly, at least up until a year ago, not every single motherboard supported this interface, and some motherboards will have one connection, which may seem a little limiting. Some will have two. You need to read up on the current state of play because the technology is developing all the time. So the absolute fastest hard drive system you could get would consist entirely of NVMe drives. But for most people, and even musicians, or perhaps there will definitely be exceptions to high power user musicians, but one or possibly two of these drives would be absolutely great. But you could easily supplement your sample library collection with SATA drives and even USB drives. Most modern systems will use USB 3, which is a data speed. USB-C is a very popular connection. You would expect a USB-C drive with a USB-C cable to achieve USB 3 speeds. But as we will see, just because a drive is a USB drive, it's stuck into the back of your computer, it doesn't mean to say that it is going to be slower than an internal drive. So let's have a look at some of the options here. I just mentioned them so you know where they are and what they do. I've accidentally hit the button again, so these figures may be slightly different to the ones in the previous shot. But let's just have a quick look at this. So in the file menu, and you will want to do this, you can copy the results and paste them into a Word document or a text file. You can also directly save a text version of this, which actually gives you a little bit more information than what you see on screen, or you can save a screenshot of the results. That might, like the screenshots, I really don't want any more information than this, even though I am a bit geeky. Now the settings menu is something which you may also need to look at before you run your tests. There is an option here to select an NVMe drive. So if you have an one of these drives in your machine, then select this before running the test. Now I actually did a couple of tests using the default setting and this, and there wasn't a massive difference, but you might as well use the correct settings for the correct drive. So in the profiles menu, you can see there are other options, including a real world performance test. You can use these if you want, just to compare the results and see how they differ, if indeed they do differ from the main results on the page here. There are as well themes if you want a different layout to view the results. I'm quite happy with the default view. There's also a help section. So there are actually more complex settings you can delve into, and I shall leave a link to a couple of videos which go into these in more detail. They are a really nerdy, weedy thing to get into. And if you just want to test the relative speeds of a couple of disks, then I think this information is probably enough for most people. So just before we get into the disk speeds, this is Crystal Mark Retro, and you can see it gives some information about your system. It does not have the little drop down menus for the disk drive, so if you find this useful, maybe you will, maybe you won't, but this is not the program to use to test your disk speeds. So here is the result for my C drive. Now the machine itself it's almost 3 years old. I actually can't remember what the manufacturer or the model number of any of these drives are. I can tell you the type, which I will do, of course, but you can tell from these results that the different drives, even if they are of a similar type, will have and can have different performances. So the C drive, this is where Windows is on and programs tend to run from. This is a 1 terabyte solid state drive. And it is quite nippy, as you can see from the sequential results at any rate, but also the random figures are not too shoddy either. So this is a good drive to have for your C drive. So let's have a look at the next drive. This is the D drive. This is another 1 terabyte solid state drive. I keep the video files for my YouTube channel on this drive, so I read and write the video files as I'm editing them to this drive. So it's another 1 terabyte drive, but you can see it is far slower than the C drive. It is 558 megabytes per second, and this is probably what I would expect from most solid state drives connected via a SATA connection or possibly even a USB connection. We'll get onto that in a second. So it's a little bit slow, but I don't really have a problem using this for video editing. If I have recorded a large file and save it, then I do get the little spinny icon, so it is taking a little while to write to the disk. You can see the write speed is a lot slower than I would have thought, to be honest, but there you go. So I use this, and to be honest, it's not a major problem. I don't have any problems with this. So let's have a look at the next one, which is, so this is drive E. This is a mechanical drive. It is 3 terabytes. I must have thought that was a good size to buy. Probably price had something to do with it. And I back up the video files to this drive, and I also use it for storage. So a mechanical drive, you can see it is it's less than half the speed of a solid state drive. The write speed is surprisingly quick, certainly compared to the solid state drive, to the D drive. I'm really surprised at the write speed of the D drive. But you can see that the sequential result is much lower, and if we come down to the random read and write speeds, you can see that they are considerably lower. But as I say, I tend to use this for storage. I'm not reading and writing working files to and from it, so this isn't a major problem for me. So let's have a look at the last drive on this system, which is a 5 terabyte drive. It's a hard disk, and it is connected via USB. I suspect this is USB 3, at least I certainly hope it would be. And you can see that this is much slower than the internal drive. Surprisingly, perhaps the read and the write speed sequentially are not too different, but when we come down to the random reads and writes, you can see that there is strangely, I find it strange that the write speeds are faster than the read speeds. But again, I use this drive for storage, and you might think these are really poor results compared to the solid state drives, and yes, of course they are, but in real world terms I don't have a problem with this. Again, as I say, I use it for storage. So that's my video and YouTube computer. Let's now get to the interesting bits. Let's have a look at the music machine, and I have 9 drives connected to this. Now this machine it's just over a year old. Let's start with the C drive. Now this is definitely an NVMe drive. Now it's only 1 terabyte in size. I could have got a larger one, but I didn't want to be tempted to take the easy route and store samples and stuff on this drive, because if any drive is going to fail, I reckon, could be wrong here, but I reckon it's most likely going to be the C drive, the drive which has the operating system on. So I want to keep all my installation files, all my sample libraries, all the sample content on other drives. I don't want them on the C drive, so I try to put as little as I can on the C drive. So this is NVMe. So I ran 2 tests on this drive, one using the default setting, as you can see, and one using the NVMe setting. And you can see there's a small difference in the results, but not a massive amount of difference. But I guess, you know, possibly the NVMe setting gives you a slightly more accurate result, but I don't have anything to compare it with. So there you go. That's just to see the difference between the default and the NVMe test. So this is a fast drive, 7,000 megabytes per second, which is what the stated speed is, and the read and write speeds are pretty quick. The sequential speeds anyway. When we get down into real world or more realistic figures, it's still pretty fast and pretty nippy. So the operating system is going to load very quickly. Programs, obviously I'm using Cubase, so that is running from the C drive, so that is going to run pretty quickly. That's going to load pretty quickly. I'm quite happy with that. Let's have a look at the other drives. This is the D drive, and I do know this is a Samsung Evo drive. 4 terabytes. And again, if we check the speeds, it's the stated speed is 500 megabytes per second, I think. So that is the speed that we are getting. So looking at the random read and write speeds, it is running pretty much as expected. I use this for storing VST sample content. So these are not sample libraries perhaps in the traditional sense. They are VST plugins which have a sample content. So a lot of native instruments use VSTs with a sample content, as do many other manufacturers. So that is what is stored on the D drive. So this is the E drive. It's another 4 terabyte solid state drive. I can't remember the make or the manufacturer. I renamed it to orchestral because I have a lot of orchestral sample libraries on here. But you can see the speeds are relatively close to the other one, 500 megabytes per second sequential read and write speeds. So pretty close to what I would expect the manufacturer's specs to say. So this is the F drive, and again another 4 terabyte solid state drive. The manufacturer and model, again, I don't know because I did rename the drive. I suspect it may well be another Samsung drive. But again, the results are very similar to the others. So this is the G drive. It's another solid state drive, and you can see the results are very similar to the others. They may well all be Samsung Evos. Again, I renamed the drive, so I don't know what model these are. But it's slightly reassuring to see that all these solid state drives are pretty similar. And this is the H drive, and you'll be sick of hearing me say this, another 4 terabyte solid state drive of unknown origin, possibly a Samsung. Sometimes they use Crucial or WD drives, Western Digital. But again, very similar results. Now this is drive I, and this is a mechanical drive, and you can see that the speeds are much slower. I just use this for the temporary storage of samples, sort of sample packs, which I don't stream from this drive, certainly into a project. I just use them to store them. I don't use standalone samples very often, but if I'm looking for a particular sound, I might take a look at what's on this drive, and if I'm going to use a sample, I'll drag it onto the project drive. So this is the J drive. It is an Extreme SSD, that's the name. I can't quite remember who makes these. But this is connected via a USB socket on the back of the PC. But it is showing sequential speed of 1000 megabytes per second. So this is pretty fast. So just because the drive is a USB drive, it does not necessarily mean that it's going to be any slower than an internal drive. I use this for some sample libraries, but not the main ones which are on the other drives, but it is quite easily fast enough to be used for sample library storage. And this is drive K. This is the last one. You will be pleased to hear this is a mechanical drive connected via USB, and you can see that the speeds are much slower. This is the drive I use to store the installation files if I need to reinstall any plugins. So I have actually streamed samples from this drive, and it's worked just fine, but not many and not a lot, and not something which I tend to do. Again, as I say, this is basically used to back up and store files. So if the C drive goes pear-shaped, I have all my installation files on this drive, and I can reinstall my software. It takes an absolute age. So if you want to know how fast your hard drives are, that is certainly one way to find out and compare the speeds of different drives. Now, as I said, this is just the 50-cent tier of hard disk speeds. Personally, I don't really think I need to know any more than this. You can dive as far down the hard disk rabbit hole as you want to go by checking out the links in the descriptions. That will give you a good start. I hope you found this interesting and useful. After all that, I am going to lie down in a dark room and think about making some music. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video.